Hi, this is Teddy, and today you're listening to Liuba Grechen Shirley, founder of Vote Mama, on Two Broads Talking Politics. Get your vaccine!
Are you listening?
Hi, everyone. I am Kelly. This is Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm on with my co-host, Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hey, Kelly.
And today we have a returning guest who I am super excited to talk to, somebody who understands the world of working moms even more than Sophie and I do, because she has 3 kids. So this is Liuba Grechen Shirley, who is the founder and CEO of Vote Mama. So hi, Liuba.
Hi, it's great to be here again. Thanks so much.
Yes. So we talked to you right after Vote Mama started. So I am excited to check back in with you and talk a little bit about what is going on in the state of things right now. But just in case people haven't listened to every single episode and don't remember, could you remind us just a little bit about what Vote Mama is and why you started it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I ran for Congress in 2018 against Peter King. And when I launched my campaign, my children were 1 and 3. And I had them every day with me on the campaign trail. My mom is a teacher and she's retired now, thankfully, but during the campaign she was working and she would come home at 3:30 every day. And so I had, for the first few months of my campaign, a baby strapped to my chest and a toddler by my side. And I was out talking to voters and talking to donors and raising funds and running a campaign. And it was about 5-6 months into the campaign when I put a request into the Federal Election Commission and I asked if I could use some of the funds that I was raising for my campaign for childcare. When you run for Congress, you give up your salary and you're working full time without a salary. And I couldn't afford to pick up the cost of childcare on top of everything else, which is why we have so many millionaires in office and so many independently wealthy people. And to my surprise, it was a bipartisan unanimous decision. It changed the way that people run for office. We've now seen 51 federal candidates use their campaign funds to cover childcare. And after my campaign ended, I could only think back to the beginning and what support I needed then and what support really made a difference during my campaign. And I launched Vote Mama, the PAC, in 2019, and then I launched the foundation in 2020. So the PAC supports, endorses, funds, mentors moms who are running from progressive moms who are running from school board to Senate. We've supported now over 150 candidates running across the country. And then the foundation is really working to break down the cultural and structural barriers that moms face when they step up and run. We are now working to expand my FEC ruling and pass campaign funds for childcare for state and local candidates in all 50 states by 2023. And our long-term goal is to pass universal childcare for all Americans.
So what is the state of play right now for the states? And for people who don't understand a lot about how campaign finance works, these are separate systems. So people running for the House or for the Senate, this is a federal system, and that's the system that your ruling was about. But then states, every state has their own set of campaign finance rules. So what does it look like across the country right now in terms of whether candidates at the state level can use campaign funds for childcare?
Yeah, so we have been working with legislators across the country. 22 states have now approved the use of campaign funds for childcare. 11 have approved it through an ethics ruling, which basically you put a request into your local ethics board, you make this request and say, can I use campaign funds for childcare? They can say yes, but it's not as long term as we would like it to be. It can be overruled. There can be other candidates that might have issues moving forward. So we really are trying to codify it. And all of those states that have passed this through an ethics ruling, we're now trying to pass legislation, which also helps to normalize it. There are 11 additional states who have actually passed the legislation. Connecticut is about to become the 12th that passed the House and Senate, and we're just waiting for the governor to sign, which should happen in the next week. So in about a week, there will be 12 states that have passed legislation and 11 who have approved this through an ethics ruling. And it really is the first structural barrier, the first financial barrier that we have broken it down to make it easier for working parents to step up and run. For the longest time, we have had policies that fail working families across the country. We're 27th in education. We're 27th in healthcare. We're 86 in terms of global women's political empowerment. it costs more to send your infant to childcare than it does to send your teenager to college. And it's because we don't have enough people who understand these issues at a visceral level in office, at all levels of government. And this one simple structural change gives us the opportunity to actually transform the political landscape, to change who has a seat at the decision-making table so that we can prioritize legislation that actually helps most Americans.
On the Vote Mama website, you have a campaign funds for childcare report. And I thought it was really interesting to dig into those numbers about who spent funds on childcare in 2018 and 2020. I was really interested to see that not only was it disproportionately helping women, but 45% of campaign funds were spent by people of color. And so can you talk a little bit about why childcare is also a racial justice issue?
Absolutely. At the federal level, you're right. It's 45% of the campaign funds that have been spent for childcare have been spent by candidates of color, 73% by women. And it's actually been a pretty even breakdown of individual candidates using it. So it's 30 women and 21 men at the federal level, but 73% of the funds have been used by women. So it actually turns out that women use campaign funds for childcare as a more of a daily childcare so they can go out and campaign, where men will tend to use campaign funds for childcare if they want their partner, if they want their wife to join them at a particular event. So they end up using a smaller percentage, even though almost as many men are using it. And we found that at the state level, actually more individual men are using it, but 61% of the funds have been used by women. But it is a racial justice issue, especially candidates of color have a really hard time getting into races and raising as much money. It's something where usually white men have a really easy time raising the funds that they need. Women have a harder time. Women of color have an even harder time being taken seriously when they step up to run and raise the funds. It's much harder for them to raise. So we need to make sure that we are supporting women of color in particular, moms of color, to step up and run. And campaign funds for childcare make it so much easier for people who are average working Americans, who are not independently wealthy, to actually run for office and be able to pay for childcare for their children. It breaks down that barrier to just make it a little bit easier to actually run. And childcare is one of the major barriers that hold women back from running. And then you look at childcare in general. The people who work at childcare centers are mostly women of color. They are lucky if they get paid $10 an hour, where, if you're a kindergarten teacher, you're getting paid $30 an hour. This is something where half the people who work at childcare centers are actually living on public assistance and can't afford safe childcare for their own children. And it's a system that it's a failed market. It doesn't work because parents can't afford to spend any more. Childcare centers are already operating on razor thin margins, and the majority of people who work there are women of color. We need to change how childcare works across the board. We need complete systemic change. And the way to do that is to make it easier to get working moms into office who understand this issue, who will actually fight for systemic change for childcare for all Americans.
So you have some great profiles in that report, too, about some of the people who have run for Congress who have used these funds. Can you talk about who some of them are? There are names that people are certainly going to recognize and are going to be so glad are in Congress.
Yes, absolutely. Katie Porter used campaign funds for childcare in 2018. We ran it during the same cycle. Katie Porter is now the first single mom in office. Ilhan Omar used her campaign funds for childcare. She's the first Somali American, one of the first 2 Muslim women to serve in Congress. She used campaign funds for childcare and has said it made a huge difference, and she probably would not have been able to run without it. Jahana Hayes, she's the first Black woman to represent Connecticut. Nikema Williams has used campaign funds for childcare. Nikema, she managed Zoom kindergarten this year for Carter, her son, while running for Congress. That is the most incredible thing. And campaign funds for childcare made a huge difference for her to be able to run. People like Representatives Eric Swalwell have also used campaign funds for childcare. This is something that gets incredible people into office who are going to fight for progressive issues, who will actually help Americans. When they get into office, they're fighting based on their own personal lived experience. When you understand these issues because they're your personal lived experience, you're going to legislate to make sure that other parents and other Americans have the support that they need.
So you mentioned progressive causes, but I'm looking at the report, and interestingly, of the 51 candidates for federal office who spent money on childcare, donations like childcare in 2018 to 2020. There, 8 of them were Republicans. So have you seen this as a bipartisan issue? Have you noticed that people from both parties are interested?
Completely. That I think is the biggest surprise for me is how bipartisan this has been. We've seen moms, dads, Democrats, and Republicans using their campaign funds for childcare. This has been passed. This has been prime sponsored at the state level by many Republicans. It's been passed by Republican governors, signed by Republican governors. I mean, just this year, we got it passed in Vermont and in Arkansas, in West Virginia and Montana. This is a complete bipartisan issue where people understand that it makes a difference in terms of who has a chance to run for office. When I got this passed by the Federal Election Commission, Fox News said it was the one bipartisan thing they could agree with. But this has been something that Republicans are also starting to use more. So if you look at the 2018 cycle, 10% of the funds used were used by Republicans. In 2020, it was actually 30% of the funds used were used by Republicans. So it is a bipartisan issue. It's across the board. We're seeing both Democrats and Republicans interested in working with us on this legislation, interested in prime sponsoring, co-sponsoring, and really being advocates for it.
So for people who are listening who have not themselves run for office, can you talk a little bit about what that actually looks like and sort of a day-to-day? I mean, I think, we've talked to enough people to sort of get it now, I think, but still, I don't even know if I truly understand this process, but just how time-consuming, life-consuming it is to run for office.
I don't think you can ever fully grasp it until you go through it yourself. I talked to so many people to try to get an idea of what I was getting myself into. Until you get into it, there's no way to know. I launched that campaign. All I wanted to do was get out and talk to voters, get out and talk about the policies and the issues. And the reality is when you run for Congress, you're spending about 40 hours a week during call time. So you get up in the morning, you're juggling children, you're doing all of this. I used to do call time from my house in the morning. So I could juggle the babies and do all of this. And you literally sit in a room with a headset on and you dial for dollars and you have to make phone calls to donors. First, you start with your friends and family, and then you start cold calling people and introducing yourself and telling them why you're running and raising funds to run for Congress. And then you go out and you talk to voters, you knock on doors, you're going to do town halls, you're going to every local meeting, every civic group, every constituent group that you can possibly get in front of to get to understand what's happening in your community, to get to understand the issues that most affect people in your community. Every time we knocked on a door, somebody would say, "Oh my goodness, you're the first person to come to my door." And that was always the most fun for me. We knocked on over 250,000 doors. You are working 24/7. You don't get a day off. It is, you get up early in the morning, you're raising funds, you're out there, you're doing meet and greets, you're having candidate coffee hours, you're out till 10 o'clock at night. On the weekends, you're visiting every group that you can possibly think. On Sundays, you're in multiple different churches. You are talking to everyone that you can across the district. It is like having 3 full-time jobs on top of raising children. And from my personal experience and every mom that I've ever spoken with, they're still the primary caregivers during their campaign. Even during GOTV weekend, I was still the one, making sure my kids had everything they need. And I had my mom and I had my husband, but my husband works long hours and commutes to the city and it does not get home till late in the evening. So it really was, it was a complete and utter family affair where everybody was in this, but it was still me juggling babies, nursing, making phone calls to donors, doing everything that I could. And it's hard. It is a very difficult thing to do. And we need to make it easier to run. We need to make it easier to serve. Once you get into office, you need to be able to be a present parent and to serve. We need to change the way that the voting schedule works. We need to change the stigma around moving your family to Washington because people are told keep your families in district. But the reality is, if you do that, you're not going to see your children very much. Kirsten Gillibrand will be the first person to say you have to move your family to Washington. And that used to be the norm. It only changed in the 90s with Newt Gingrich saying keep your families in the district. We need to make Congress much more family friendly. That's when you'll start to see a change in who really is serving. And that's what Vote Mama is trying to do. We are trying to break down the barriers to normalize what it looks like to run as a mom and to serve as a mom.
So speaking of making change, you had mentioned the goal of working towards the approval of campaign funds for childcare in all 50 states by 2023. And in the report we were talking about, it mentions that you're partnering with 18 states in 2021. Can you talk a little bit about what partnering means? Like, how are you actually going to achieve this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we partner with legislators in different states. Sometimes we are very active. Sometimes there are legislators who come to us and say we're doing this, and we help, get an op-ed or work on an article with them. And in the most part, in most cases, we are actively reaching out to legislators. We are giving them draft legislation. We are working with them to get this through. So in Connecticut, we've been working very closely with Senator May Flexer, Representative Carolyn Simmons. The Lieutenant Governor has been incredibly supportive. For instance, in Virginia, this was something that we've tried to get this passed out the last two legislative sessions in Virginia. The problem this year is they have a cap on how many bills they can introduce because of COVID. So nobody wanted to put this in as a standalone bill, and it ended up being part of a overhaul of campaign finance reform. So I was testifying in one of the hearings, and everybody supported the use of campaign funds for childcare, but there were a few legislators who were concerned about whether or not this bill would actually not allow them to use their campaign funds for things like pizza parties. And this was actually the argument. So we are actively taking part in their committee hearings. I'm testifying in committee hearings. It got sent back to committee because of that piece of the pizza party. And next year, we worked with Senator McClellan to put a letter into the Attorney General's office. We're trying to get the AG to approve this, and then next year we will put in standalone legislation. In Louisiana, we supported Morgan Lamondre, who was running for a state seat in Baton Rouge. She put this request in to her local ethics committee. They had said yes to 4 men in the past, and they said to Morgan, "There's a committee hearing. You have to listen to it to believe it," where a 70-year-old man said to her, "You have misplaced priorities, and your primary responsibility is to take care of your children." We coached Morgan through the appeals process. We helped her, and she won that appeal. So Louisiana is a state that has now approved the use of campaign funds for childcare through an ethics ruling, but has yet to pass legislation. So we are working with state reps down there to introduce legislation. But it's something where we are really partnering. In West Virginia, we partnered with the West Virginia Now, National Organization of Women, and they were huge advocates, and they really lobbied their legislators and worked closely with their legislators to get this passed. So it's a matter of building a coalition on the ground, finding the legislators to sponsor this, finding the local groups that will help us support it, and getting it passed.
So you've obviously had to learn a lot about how campaign finance works in general, all over the place, federal and all these states. Are there, beyond just being able to use campaign funds for childcare, are there broader recommendations that you would have about what campaign finance reform should look like?
We need publicly financed elections. That is the number one thing. If we want to really change the way this country works, we pass publicly financed elections. You look at what's happening in New York. We now have publicly financed elections. We have matching funds, and you see so many more working people stepping up to run. If you're an individual and you want to run for office, but you're told you have to raise $100,000 before anyone will take you seriously, how are you supposed to do that? That was the first thing I was told. If you don't come from a wealthy family, the first thing they'll tell you to do is reach out to your friends and family. Most people don't have friends and family that could give you $100,000. And I remember first dialing for dollars and calling everybody. I was asking for $25. I was asking for $50. It's so time consuming. And you end up spending most of your time dialing for dollars rather than talking about the issues with your constituents, which is what you should be doing. You should be out there having town halls and getting to understand how the policies affect their lives and how you can make a difference. And yet, there are candidates who spend 60 hours a week fundraising. That needs to change. So the other thing is, when you run for a federal seat, you don't have time to have another job. You have to run for Congress. If you weren't spending 40 to 50 hours a week during call time, you could actually have a job and run and take care of your children and manage that schedule. That would drastically change who has a seat at the table. So that's the number one thing that we can do, passing campaign funds for childcare. If you want to actually see a government that looks like most Americans, you change the way that we run for office and you actually have publicly financed elections.
All right. Well, we're all in on getting more moms into office up and down the ballot. So how can listeners learn more about Vote Mama and help?
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to our PAC website, which is votemama.org. You can follow the PAC on Twitter and Instagram, which is at VoteMamaUS. And then you can follow the foundation. Go to the foundation website, which is votemamafoundation.org. And on Twitter and Instagram, it's Vote Mama FDN. And it's the same for Facebook as well. But follow us, get to know the candidates that we're supporting on the PAC side, get to know what legislation we're working on the foundation side, join our movement, find a local mom that's running for office near you, suggest that she apply for Vote Mama support, and volunteer, donate. Make a small contribution, whatever you can do, because right now, until we have publicly financed elections, raising money is critical to building power. That is how you build power for moms who are running for office. You help them raise funds. So that's why we write direct contributions to our candidates. We really try to be there for absolutely everything they need. So follow us online, get involved, learn about the moms we're supporting, and find out who's running in your area and get involved. And if you want to run for office, we are opening up our next round of applications in July. Please go online at votemama.org and fill it out. We'd be happy to speak with you.
And final question from me is, we started this all because of a mom and grandma who is near and dear to us, Hillary Clinton, whom you've gotten to meet. So what was that like?
I've gotten to meet her a couple times now. My first interaction with Hillary, I remember it was a Friday afternoon and my campaign manager called me and she said, Liuba. I said, what? She goes, Liuba Grechen Shirley. And I thought I was getting in trouble. And she goes, sit down. And I remember thinking, oh God, I screwed up. I did something wrong. And she said, Secretary Hillary Clinton has written a letter of support for our request to the FEC. And I started crying. And then Hillary Clinton wrote a 3-page letter in support of my FEC request. And that was incredible. And then she actually, she hosted a fundraiser for me while I was running for Congress. I got to meet her then, which was amazing. And then when I launched Vote Mama, she came to the launch event. And she stood next to me when I gave the first speech about Vote Mama, and I had never been more nervous. So I will tell you a really dorky thing. When I was 13 and Bill Clinton was running, I had a green marble notebook. I can't believe I'm telling you this. I had a green marble notebook, and I cut out clippings of everything that had to do with the Clintons, with Chelsea, with Hillary. I remember her speech at the Beijing Women's Summit. That was huge for me. And I had this notebook. And it was such an honor to meet her. And she stood next to me. She listened to my speech, which was so nerve-wracking, but incredible. And then when she spoke, she answered a FaceTime call from her grandchildren in the middle of it. And somebody had taken a video of this, posted it online, it went viral, and it ended up on Colbert that night. And my mom called me at midnight screaming, "You're on Colbert." And because of that, because Hillary Clinton answered a FaceTime call during that conversation, during that speech, we had hundreds of applications from moms running across the country. And it was amazing to get to talk to all of those incredible women. But she's been so supportive. I've met her a few times since then. My daughter's had the chance to meet her. It's my son as well, but my daughter was super excited to meet her. And I think Nicholas was a little too young to realize. But she's incredibly supportive of women running for office and really trying to change the political landscape.
Oh, that's wonderful. Hillary Clinton, if you're listening, open invitation to come on the podcast. Well, Liuba, thank you so much for speaking with us again today. It's always wonderful to speak with you, and this is just such important work.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you guys again.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.